The Holy Gospel, according to Luke, the 14th chapter. Now great crowds accompanied Jesus, and he turned and said to them, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 men to meet him, who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. The Gospel of the Lord. This reading, and a couple of the Gospel readings, are what I refer to as the tough teachings of Jesus Christ. Hard sayings of Jesus. They're hard because the words are hard. They kind of seize you. Now this is Luke chapter 14, so we're in the winter before the spring of the crucifixion of Jesus. Much, much closer to the end of his public ministry, preaching, teaching miracles, than he was at the beginning of his ministry. He's in the southern area. And he's continuing to journey toward Jerusalem and his appointment with the cross. So here we have the words of Jesus that say, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. I'm going to read this another way. And this way is accurate as well, because the word hate is actually implicitly repeated. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, and does not hate his own mother, and does not hate his own wife, and does not hate his own children, and does not hate his own brothers, and does not hate his own sisters, and yes, does not even hate his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Tough teaching of Christ. There are those who have heard those words, and they've come to the conclusion that I cannot follow a God who orders me to hate my family. After all, it sounds like Jesus is telling us we have to hate our own flesh and blood. We have to have those who have the same blood coursing through their veins as do we. We have to hate those to whom we're married. Okay? Sounds tough, doesn't it? Tough teaching. Well, that's hard to square. It's hard to square with Jesus Christ. He is the God of love. He's the one that reinforced the idea that you are to honor, which means to love your mother and your father. He is the one that said you are to love the Lord your God with everything about you. Heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your God. He is the one that said you love your neighbor as yourself. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. He also said you are to love one another as I have loved you. None of that, but Jesus said you are to love your enemies. Jesus does not teach us to hate anyone at any time, and yet he's using the word hate here. Now at this time it said great crowds accompanied Jesus. Multitudes, people were following him along the paths and the trails and the streets, following Jesus. He's going to turn and say, let me teach you what it really means to follow me. You're just a follower of me. Let me show you what it really means, what it really takes to follow me. And he comes up with this very powerful sentence. Very powerful sentence. Jesus was fully God, fully man. He was perfect. But one thing he was not was a salesperson. He's not a salesperson. As a matter of fact, he is truth in advertising. He's truth in all things. He would not have made a very good marketing guy. I have had a couple of jobs in my life in which I was a professional salesperson. I had to sell, or I didn't have any money, and didn't have money, I didn't have anything to eat. And I remember I had the privilege of going to Stamford, Connecticut, many years ago, and spend a week with the man who was probably the greatest salesperson in the whole nation at that time. I recall his name as being something like Tom McCabe. He was the man who developed, who originated the sales training for the Xerox Corporation back in the 60s and I guess in the 70s. At that time, Xerox Corporation had the finest sales programs of any corporation in the world. People were flocking to and using that Xerox sales model and learning. And I spent a week with the man who developed that. And I remember during that week, the guy said, you sell benefits, not features. It's not what something does, a service or a product, that causes somebody to buy. It's what it does for them. Take a car, for example. You walk out of the parking lot and there's a salesman. He's going to sell you on a car. And you're interested in something that's economical, so he takes you to the cars that get 30 miles a gallon. This thing gets 30 miles to the gallon. That's a feature. Great. You don't buy until he takes the feature and turns it into a benefit. So he calculates what that means for us. He said, what that means is if you drive X number of miles a year, you're going to save $2,000 a year. You're going to save $2,000. He's going to say, imagine what you could do with $2,000 a year. Imagine the nice vacation you could take, the food you could eat, going out to eat. That's your college fund. $2,000 a year goes back for the college fund. $2,000 a year. He says, not only that, but if you fill up once per week now with your regular car, now it's every 2 weeks. That's 52 times less you're going to have to drive to the service station. That's an average of 10 minutes each time. It's 500 minutes. This is going to give you 8 more hours every year to do what you want to do. Think about that. That's like having a day off every year because you're driving this car. He's selling us the benefits, not the features. Now, if Jesus were the salesman there, he'd be honest. He'd say, this thing does get 30 miles a gallon. You're going to save some cost on gasoline. But then he'd tell us the rest of the story. He'd say, yeah, but this car's going to be a lot. It's going to cost a lot. That's 7 years worth of payments times X amount. You're going to pay $35,000. And not just that, but $5,000 is nothing but interest. He said, you see these fancy tires? You're going to have to replace those every 2 years. They're going to wear out. That oil, you're going to change it. Air filter, you're going to have to get it repaired. You're going to have to keep it clean inside and out. It's a lot of trouble. He said, you drive this new car, a month from now, it'll be worth 2/3 of what you paid for it. None of that, your insurance is going to go up. You're going to be spending more money on insurance. And by the way, the more time you spend on the road, the greater the odds you're going to have a wreck and hurt somebody. Jesus is the fine print in an ad. He's the lawyer that speaks so fast at the end of an ad you can't hear him, can't understand him. He is disclosing the whole truth. He is not selling anybody on Christianity. In fact, just the opposite. He said, I want you to know what you're getting into. I want you to make a decision based upon the facts. I do not want someone who's half-hearted committed. He is not recruiting people. Numbers mean nothing to him. They mean something to every one of us. We want the most people in our church. We want the most this. We want the most this. We want the most this. Jesus is quality over quantity. His focus should be our focus. He is the fine print here. And so he has this statement. You cannot be my disciple unless you hate everything that should be important to you. You cannot be my disciple unless you bear your own cross. You cannot be my disciple unless you forsake everything else. So what's going on here? This is not going to draw too many people into the church, is it? Well, Jesus is not being inconsistent. He is the God of love. He wants us to love and to be about love. The Bible Bible does not contradict itself. Jesus does not contradict himself. But to understand what Jesus said in a given situation, you have to understand the context. What was going on? What was happening? What did he really say? And you also need to read it in conjunction with other parts of the Bible sometimes. What he said here was similar to something he said in Matthew chapter 10, verse 37. And he said, if anyone loves father or mother more than me, he is not worthy of me. If anyone loves, he said, wife or children more than me, he is not worthy of me. And then he says something else and said, he is not worthy of me. 3 times in this reading, he said, cannot be my disciple. If you go to Matthew chapter 10, verse 37, 3 times he says, is not worthy of me. The word hate here is the most important word. The word hate, the Greek word is miseo. Miseo. Okay? It is not an absolute term here. Not as it's used, it is a relative term. If you look up the definition of miseo, hate, it means to detest. That's what we figure it does. But it also means something else, because you see the word he's using here and the framework in which he's using it is called Semitic hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggeration on purpose. It's going over the top in how we describe something. That's the greatest movie I've ever seen. That's the fastest car ever invented. Sometimes that's hyperbole. We exaggerate to make a point. It's called Semitic because they were Semite people. That's the name of the people who lived in that part of the world. That's why you know the phrase anti-Semitism is anti-Jewish today. So this is a Semitic hyperbole statement to make a point. It's a relative term, not an absolute, because Jesus does not call us to hate. So, when you peel back the layers of the onion here, the word hate has other meanings other than just detest. And the meaning that fits this is to love less. That's it. That is the definition of hate used by them and used by Jesus. Love less, to love less. So let me read it another way that makes more sense. If anyone comes to me and does not love his own father and mother less than he loves me, he cannot be my disciple. He is not calling us to hate. He's calling us to prioritize our life so that he is number one. He ought to be number one in the polls of our lives. This is football season. First college football poll came out last week. And by the way, you know who's number one, right? Alabama, Crimson Tide. Okay. He's calling us to make sure that he stays number one in our own private personal poll. And then we can worry about what's number 2 through 25. He does not call us to hate others. He calls us to love him more than others. And I truly believe in my heart that if we love God the most, our love for everything and everybody else will have its proper place and it will shine through. Because if we emulate the love that Christ has for us and we emulate that love in others, we are going to take on the greatest, most fulfilling, most self-sacrificial love the world's ever seen. And we will love those whom we are supposed to love in a way we couldn't imagine if we put God first. He talks about bearing the cross. What is the cross we bear? It's what we give up and what we sacrifice to be a Christian. And we don't know what that's going to require. In one gospel account, he says you're supposed to bear your own cross daily. Picking up the cross is not something you do one time. It's not something you do when you're baptized. It's not something you only do once you're confirmed. It's something you do every morning. And you don't put that cross down until you go to bed. Then you can take the cross off your shoulders and give them a rest. Because the next morning you're going to pick it up again. Now, to illustrate what Jesus wants us to do, which is to calculate the cost of what we're getting into, he gives us 2 examples. He gives us an example of construction, building something, an example of destruction, a war example. And a war is about destroying. So he gives us what you could call a peacetime and a wartime example. He said, if you're going to build a tower, a building, you're going to build a shopping mall. You're going to build whatever it is you're going to build. A prudent man first sits down and calculates how much it's going to cost. How much concrete, how much steel, how much wood, how much labor, how much paint. You figure it out. And you say, can I put it up or not? Can I build this building and get it up and running? And if you don't, you're going to quit halfway through. And if you quit halfway through, that half-finished project is going to be a testament to your lack of commitment and your lack of wisdom and your lack of common sense and your lack of foresight. The other example, you got a king, could be a president, could be a prince, but whatever it is, here's a king, he's about to go to war. Well, before he starts the battle, he's got to calculate his troops and their resources and their skills and their training and their abilities against the army that's marching toward him. And if he cannot win the war, he's not going to start it. He's going to find another way. He's going to ask for terms of peace to preserve his nation. And it goes on to say that, therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Renounce. This means the willingness to give it up if you need to. Okay? Doesn't mean you sell everything or you destroy everything, but be willing to. I think the best way to look at this is to say, the stuff I have, the things I do, the people with whom I have relationships, are they going to get into the way of my relationship with God and my relationship with others as God intends it? Are they going to get in the way? Are they going to inhibit the relationship? Are they going to get me in trouble? If so, I need to give up those things or those activities or those people. And a word of advice to those who are younger: don't go dating people that don't have faith. Don't go get engaged to somebody who's not a Christian. Don't marry someone who's not a Christian. There are plenty of people who have a similar faith that you can fall in love with. And then you won't spend the rest of your life fighting with them over what should be most important to you, your God. There's a phrase for that. To be evenly or equally yoked. Have a similar faith and belief. Life will be so much better for you. Okay. Talks about salt. I'm not going to talk about salt today. Instead, I'm going to end the sermon because not too long from right now, we're going to be at Verna's house and we're going to be reaching for the salt shaker. We can talk about salt another time. So Jesus does not call us to hate, but he calls us to make him number one. And if there are things that keep him from being number one in our lives, then we need to have a thing surgery. And then we need to remove those things so we can see him clearly. In the name of God. Amen.